The following was recorded in front of a live studio audience at the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. This is the United Podcast Network.
And this is live from the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, a program designed to give you the benefits of podcasting. Here's your host, Mr. Podcast himself, David Garofalo.
Well, I don't know about that, but welcome everybody to Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. And this is a 21-minute or less weekly podcast to help you get your message out, grow your business, and build your bottom line in doing it via podcasting. So let me help bring your marketing and advertisement into the 21st century here at Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. My name is David Garofalo. I've been doing podcasting now since 2010. And over these years, I've created a yearly six-figure income by doing my podcast. And I want to help you do that, monetize it, get your show better. But one thing you have to do is you have to, in order to pull this off, you have to actually begin. You have to begin doing a podcast. And that's what we're going to talk about today. How do you start doing a podcast? So you're new to it, you heard about it, you've always wanted to do it. What you got to do is start. And nobody likes the way their show starts, the beginning of the show. They're going to improve as time goes on. Your show will get better and better as time goes on. But there's no way to get your show better until you begin. So you need to start doing a podcast. This is a 21-minute podcast, 21 minutes or less, as I say. So let's start the clock now. And here we go. How do you start doing a podcast? Podcasts are growing in a big way. This is what I call the golden age of podcasting. Maybe in the 30s, the golden age of radio began in the 1930s. Fast forward into 1950s, 1960s, it became the golden age of television. And here we are, almost 2020, and this is the golden age of podcasting. And what is podcasting? Podcasting, well, you know what podcasting is because you're listening to a podcast right now, or you're listening and watching a vodcast, meaning a video on demand cast. Either way, they are podcasts, and you're listening to them, and you know how to get them, and more people are learning about podcasting. Actually, the stats now are saying 50% of all Americans over 12 years of age have listened to a podcast, and that includes you. You're listening to a podcast right now. So more than 50%, and again, this is a maybe 10-year-old product that exists, and here it is, more than 50% of people. So you got to imagine just in a couple of years from now, everybody will be listening to podcasts. So you're in a not beginning of it, you're deep in the middle of it where half the people are doing it. The opportunity to grow is amazing because we're going to double that up in the next couple of years, and then everyone's going to be listening to podcasts. But are they going to be listening to you? Is the question. They aren't if you are not going to start a podcast. But you don't know how to start a podcast. How do I do it? What's the first step? That's what we're going to talk about today. You don't need to be very technical or spend a lot of money to get something going. This is kind of elaborate that we do have a producer. Stu is on my side here, riding the controls, making sure it sounds good, looks good, adding the commercial content in and different things like that he's doing. You don't have to do that to start. You can actually start on the cheap, in other words, and you can build your show as it's going on, or you find a place like this that actually provides the service for you. But the first thing you need to do is come up with a concept, an idea of the show. What are you going to do your show on? And what I try to say to people when they're thinking of that is, as a business person myself, I like to look at what the finish line looks like. What am I trying to accomplish at the end of it before I come up with and say, this is what I want to do my show on without having any idea where it's going to end. So we're looking for a beginning, middle, and an end of what your show is. So what do you want to accomplish? In my case, for my podcast that I started in 2010, it's the Cigar Authority show. And I sell cigars for a living, so I thought I'd do a show on the Cigar Authority for a few different reasons. One thing is I wanted to drive business to my business, right? I wanted somebody to hear my podcast that was interested in cigars and then would actually come to my cigar store or go online and visit my cigar shop online and buy cigars from me. That was the idea and premise of what the finish line looked like, what I was trying to accomplish. In the middle of this thing, I want to provide information to the listener who's interested in cigars and teach them. And while I am doing that, teaching about fine cigars, I will actually be teaching myself at the same time, because I need to prepare for each and every show to get ready for it. So I need to learn as I go along also. So I'll be preparing myself, which is going to make me a better retailer, more informed. And while I'm doing it the same, I am going to be practicing podcasting each and every week I do my show. As I do that, I will be making myself better as a podcaster. So all these things will get accomplished as I go. And the idea of the show was to try to make me the authority on my subject, which was cigars. So I created the Cigar Authority. How simple. Because that's one of the things I wanted to accomplish. So you are trying to come up with your show. Are you in business? What business is that in? What do you want to try to accomplish in that business? Do you want them to actually buy hard goods, visit your website, join your email list, whatever that is? You have to think in advance of what the end is to look like. I love to work backwards like that, knowing what the end is, and then going back from there. In order to get to that end, what do we have to do? In order to finish a marathon, what do we have to do? We actually have to run the marathon. In order to run the marathon, I'm going to need the equipment, the sneakers, and I'm going to need to exercise and train and everything in between. And you figure out at the very beginning, okay, this is what I end up needing of what it is. So it could be anything. So whatever that is of yours, and there's too many possibilities of what it could be. As I'm talking to you, this is what you're trying to accomplish as the end goal. This is what you're trying to actually have the close, the sell. This is what you're trying to the finish end up being like. So let's look at that and then say, based on that finish, this is a good time to figure out what the title of the show should be. We're not talking about the episode. Now, this episode that we're having here is how to start doing a podcast. But what is this show? This show is the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. So Studio 21 is the place we're broadcasting in, and we're doing a podcast in there, and it's actually a cafe where they serve coffee, but cafe could actually be we're talking in a cafe about this subject matter. And what is my end goal here is to explain to you what Studio 21 can offer you, the podcaster, and maybe you want to do business with us. In the meantime, I'm going to provide you with a lot of information to help you going along as it's going. Each and every show will have an episode, and that episode will be called something. This one is how to start a podcast. But the show is the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. So don't worry about the podcast episode. Try to figure out what the show is, and somebody would look at Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, and they would understand that this has to do with podcasting. Or would they think it has to do with Studio 21? There's a cup of coffee there. Maybe they're confused, and we're broadcast on the United Podcast Network. So something to think about as you're getting your show together. Now the format. What is the format? This is just me talking and explaining. It's a short show, so it's going to be 21 minutes or less. Therefore, I think I can handle it by myself, so I do it. But maybe you want to have an NPR-style show. Maybe you want a talk show with guests, Q&A type of thing. You can figure that out, too. That is part of the thing of the formatting of the show. The target length of the show, I chose 21 minutes or less, actually to tie into the name of the studio, Studio 21. But maybe you want to do a longer podcast. My cigar podcast is actually 2 hours long. I think that's way too long. Live and learn. But the average, the best, what they say is about 24 minutes long. 24-minute podcast. Why 24 minutes? Because that is the ideal drive time, the most used drive time that people come and go back and forth to work. If that's the case, and you think that's the case, that's ideal. They're going to listen to your episode on the way to work. and they maybe listen to the next episode on the way home from work, and they'll get in a routine of doing that. And that is an important thing also, routine. A routine is what I want you to do. Routinely put your show out each and every week consistently. You be consistent to your listener, and your listener will be consistent to you. So schedule a weekly podcast that you're going to do it weekly, and you're going to upload it weekly if you're the one that's going to do it. A logo. You're going to need a logo for your store, for your show, and that logo should be incorporated in a square format, because that's going to be used on a lot of the search engine things that podcast catchers that are going to need to show what show it is, and somebody to actually click that button. It should be simple, easy to read. You don't need to put a whole bunch of stuff in there. Here's our logo, and here's what it is. So you need to work on that also. You need a platform, a place that hosts this show. In our case, we're using Podbeam. Podbeam is a great platform. It's worked well for us. It offers RSS feed, and it's for free. So you can do this for free, and there's places that can give you more information and do more for you and charge you for it. That's up to you. There's lots of options that are out there, just so you understand who we use. It's Podbean, B-E-A-N, Podbean. And they can also make it available to you through this RSS feed, where you can share or syndicate your audio files on all kinds of platforms. And we use up to 30 different platforms we put it on, distributed all kinds of different places for more possibility that somebody else can find us, such as iTunes, right? So we take that feed, we drop it into iTunes, and then iTunes can pick it up and send it from that point. Right now, I'm going to take a minute for you to hear about Studio 21 Podcast Cafe.
If you're in the area of Boston North into southern New Hampshire and you're thinking about doing a podcast, there is a place you have to see. It's called Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. Located right over the border into Salem, New Hampshire, Studio 21 Podcast Cafe is a live working full-service podcast and vodcast, that's video on demand, studio. All professional equipment, professional producer, and total distribution of your podcast is done for you. Would you like search engine optimization for more people to find your business, or better ranking on Google? Well, Studio 21 Podcast Cafe can do it all for you for far less than you think. Schedule a free 21-minute no-obligation consultation by going to www.studio21podcast.cafe. That's studio21podcast.cafe. Now, back to the program.
And we are back talking to you about how you can start doing a podcast, and I urge you to do it. It is a wonderful, wonderful platform where you can get your word out, you can monetize your business, help grow it, advertise your business, and it can cost you virtually nothing if you wanted to do it. Do it yourself. You got to buy a little bit of equipment, you got a little work to do, but for the most part, I mean, something like this, just a few years back, would have cost millions of dollars to try to produce, and it's here. People talk about social media. What's more social than talking? And that's what podcasting is all about. So this is a great platform. It's there for you. You should be using it. You should help your business grow, and this is one way to do it. You're going to need a little bit of a personality, and I understand a lot of people are camera shy or they're mic shy. Maybe there's somebody in your office that would be a good person to do it and help you along with it. Maybe you are a little shy about doing it, and you know one way to break your shyness is actually to do it, to break out from it, to get in front of the camera, and before you know it, it becomes second nature to you, and you can you'll actually be a better business person for it. You won't be the one that's afraid to speak at a convention or something in front of people, and it loosens you up. It's gonna work in so many different ways to help you along, not just your business, but you personally. You can help friends at that point, bring them on as guests and tell their story, help them do a podcast. So I couldn't feel stronger about it. I ended up building a podcast studio to help people get the word out themselves. So we're going to move along and help you get started and hopefully motivate you a little bit. You've been thinking about it. You're on the sidelines. Again, the best way to improve your podcast is to begin it. There's no way you can begin to improve it until you start it. So today, how to start a podcast. It's not that difficult. You can do it. You can do it on your own, or again, you can come to a place like this where we can help you all the way through. If you came into our podcast studio, we would have all the equipment set up here for you. We have a professional producer that's manning the board, and then after you leave, we're distributing in all the places for you. The one thing we can't do for you is help you with the information you're providing during the podcast, because you know your subject matter. We don't know your subject. So that's what you need to provide yourself as a subject matter. But listen, you own your own business. You know your own subject, what it is. Now, can you get that word across? And, we can go on days and days about this, but we're going to do different shows about different reasons of what to do and where it belongs in your show. But today, we're just talking about getting started. So you want to put some music in at the beginning of your show. If you heard the beginning of the show, there was a little music that ended up happening. In other words, just bringing you into the show softly, as opposed to I abruptly just come in and say, hello, welcome to it. There's a little music that played into it. You'll hear that on all kinds of TV and radio shows and things. You'll hear something like that ends up happening. I think it's important. You're going to hear that also in the commercial content and stuff, that there's a little something. But what I need to tell you is just two words about it, and that's royalty free. And this is a mistake a lot of people use. It's different on a radio show. That a radio show, you may hear the Rolling Stones playing in the background and stuff, and they're actually paying for that to be able to happen. You're not going to be able to pull that off yourself. So you need royalty music, and it's out there. You can Google it and find royalty music, or you can buy some cheap music, for a few bucks or something that somebody will allow you to end up using that, but not for big name artists, your favorite songs that you want to play in the background of your show. Once you do that and your podcast is out there, this is when it's going to start dropping off. It's not going to get any what I call Google juice to move forward. Some platforms will actually take it down. You post something like that on YouTube, and you'll see your mouth moving on video, but there'll be no sound at all. Not just the music portion, but the whole show will be eliminated off it. So it's very, very important that you know that going in. I say these things because it's live and learn. I've made, in all these years I've been doing podcasting since 2010, I've learned from all the mistakes that I made. And what I'm trying to do here is help you not make the same mistakes I made, at least. There'll be more mistakes I'll make along the way, and I'll tell you those as they go along. But what I try not to do is actually make the same mistake twice. First time, hey, it's a learning experience. Second time, shame on me. You're hearing it. Shame on you if you end up adding copyrighted material into your show and then say, what the heck happened? You heard it. Don't do it. When you do the show, now you've broadcasted the show. You put a description of the show, you put the episode description, and then you actually cross your fingers. Well, there's a lot going on the back end at that point, and you're going to need to improve that and get your word out by the words that are put on there. And once again, this is going to be something once you start the show, but the key is to start the show. Those are just some ways to end up doing a podcast. You can do the podcast on your smartphone. What I recommend is if you did it on a tablet or something like that, I'd recommend that you use a microphone. Certainly there's microphones built into cameras, and there's microphones built into your tablet or your phone, but it's going to come off much, much better if it's actually a microphone that you're able to end up doing it. So you contact, as I say, to recap, you contact Podbean, for instance, or some sort of company like that that'll do it. You set up your account. You're going to add a little music. You're going to record your content. You end with a little bit of music. You give it to them. They put it on the RSS feed. You pass it on at that point. And you're dealing with very, very little equipment as it's going. What you'd like to do is have a microphone and a headphone so you could actually hear what you're saying. I know you can hear yourself when you end up talking, but it's different when there's a microphone around it. You'll know when you're talking too loud, too soft, because you're going to actually hear it. You go from there, and then you get a board that you can actually have different levels when there's different people talking, and you can get deeper and deeper. That's when it starts costing money, when you're buying more and more and more equipment. Or you can find a place like Studio 21 where you walk in and you're gonna be a podcaster, but you don't need to know the technical parts of it and all the work that goes along through it and make some costly mistakes. So that is it. That is it of early start of getting a podcast. I hopefully got you thinking of doing a podcast, and you'll start looking into these different things and maybe some microphones and choices like that of where you want to go. Or by all means, come visit us at Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. You can find me at Dave at Studio21podcast.cafe. Make an appointment with me. I'll buy you a cup of coffee. Maybe we'll do a little 5-minute podcast and show you how simple it really is, and we'll take it from there. Again, thanks for listening in. I hope you learned something. Next week, I'm going to tell you how to organize a podcast, what goes where, and more importantly, why. What goes where and why. Next week, how to organize your podcast. So that's my 21 minutes. I'm out of here. You've been listening to the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, live from the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe on the United Podcast Network.
The views and opinions expressed by the hosts, guests, or callers of this program do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, the United Podcast Network, its partners, or affiliates.